In an industry that will stagnate and die without innovation to evolve, Ubisoft have remained steadfast with their comfort in sticking to what they know, a formula that they've made successful that has been pushed into almost every single one of their titles in one way or another since the early 2010s. Many people have taken to the internet to complain about this very thing, with some going as far to boycott the games altogether. And despite this, it's routine for them to be released with mixed perception and reviews, but a majority of their titles see a fair bit of success. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is Ubisoft's highest grossing Assassin's Creed game, raking in over a whopping $1 billion worldwide. Far Cry 6 was panned by many, including me, and it still sold incredibly well. Far Cry 3 was really the ignition point for the success Ubisoft would accumulate over the following decade, a title that dropped the player on a tropical island and handed them all kinds of recipes for mayhem and violence. The goal was to slowly take back the island a piece at a time, overcoming the oppression through means of bloodshed and brutality, all the while living off the land in a desperate attempt to drive the money-hungry pirates off. It was a soaring achievement, selling 10 million copies in 2012. Each activity the player partook in fueled the end goal. The subsequent titles that followed all took this formula in an attempt to replicate the prior accomplishments, and many of them did this in strides. Some may have strayed a little too far away from what the Far Cry community wanted and what made 3 so special, but the winning formula, as I call it, has been present in every single one of them. 4 was literally just a reskinned 3 with some new mechanics, albeit with a lot less interesting premise and main antagonist. However, its setting and gameplay are what stole the show. 5, 6, Blood Dragon, and New Dawn were all built around the concept of dismantling an army to be triumphant. They share similarities like having a weak villain or villains, numerous outposts, poor writing, and an emphasis on exploration in a gorgeous world. Hell, New Dawn's whole endgame premise was constructed around the replayability of outposts, which all had various stages to get through. So to say their gameplay loop is getting a little bit long in the tooth at this point is an understatement, and I get why so many people have grown tired of it. I'm getting up there as well. Still, somehow I managed to enjoy almost every single Ubisoft release based on the fact that I can turn my brain off, explore a gorgeous world, stealth my way through outposts feeling like a badass, and most importantly, use a bow and arrow. Because if there's one thing that Ubisoft does right, it's its gameplay. It's giving the player a power fantasy. The abilities are often meant to give you new ways to play or new opportunities to help you out with skills like being able to drop down on an enemy, grab their holstered gun, and use it against their buddy before ramming a machete between their ribcage. And if that doesn't sound fun to you, I don't know what to say. It wasn't long after the success of 3 that their studios would start taking aspects that worked in one IP and shoving them into another. Assassin's Creed has outposts, just, no modern guns. Ghost Recon has outposts, but it's third person and it's a half-baked milsim, so it doesn't really give you that power fantasy you want. Instead of making each of these IPs distinctive in their own way outside of setting and time periods, they chose to stick with something that made them a lot of money, and really, who can blame them? They had an easy approach that helped them crank out games left, right, and center, considering they weren't making any significant changes to the gameplay or the activities the player would need to indulge in as part of the story. And just like those other games, Avatar has outposts. Look, I'm gonna come out and say what you all want to hear right now. Frontiers of Pandora is fun. It was a tumultuous experience, but I can look back at my 35 hours and say that it wasn't a waste of time. I can also confidently say that after 35 hours, I have no incentive to return to the World of Pandora. I say this in almost every one of my reviews, but it ain't a flawless game either, and it certainly doesn't even attempt to reinvent the Ubisoft bag of tricks. It's exactly what everyone expected it would be, a Far Cry game set in James Cameron's extravagant universe. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't a Far Cry game, and if they do, ask them what they're smoking, cause I want some. If you ventured into any of the Far Cry games since 3, you pretty much know what you're getting here. There are slight innovations to the formula, some that work better than others, but at its core, it's Far Cry 7. Your land/country is invaded/occupied by an oppressive force. You're on a quest to build up/help a resistance that will fight against tyranny and abuse. You dismantle the enemy's operation one outpost at a time to loosen their foothold, making them structurally weaker. The main antagonist is criminally underutilized, only showing up to taunt a main character we aren't even invested in. Lastly, poorly timed and executed comedy that feels totally disjointed from the plot.
Who's there?
Water. Now you say water who?
Water who?
Water, you doing telling jokes. Don't you have more important things to do?
yeah, there are really knock-knock jokes in an Avatar game. So, as you can tell from what I just said, it's literally a Far Cry game. Now, the soft reboot of Far Cry 3 set a standard that none of the following games would be able to achieve. It told a compelling story with an antagonist and protagonist that had unforgettable arcs. Voss is still talked about today for a reason, and that reason is a good script and an astounding performance from an actor that literally reshaped the character from what Ubisoft had wanted originally.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
He was a true unhinged psychopath hell-bent on the consumption of drugs and the acquisition of money through any means, no matter how brutal. It's clear that he had no moral boundaries he was unwilling to cross, something that protagonist Jason Brody would have to adapt to in order to strike back. Jason's journey from cocky party boy to a savage warrior didn't happen overnight. This whole game centers on this downward spiral of humanity, as he slowly loses himself in the chaos and brutality, becoming much like the ones he's waging a war against. This transition is brought on directly because of Voss tying the villain and the anti-hero together in some unsettling ways. Voss had so much pull in a story that didn't even feature him that much. Not many people seem to know this, but Voss is a secondary antagonist, and he was still that popular. Avatar is in formation with a long line of titles that fails to put forth an interesting narrative or antagonist despite having some solid setups to carry it forward, all of which are squandered. There are some powerful themes on display like self-discovery, the effects of abuse, the importance of community, and the repercussions of colonization through lethal means, but none of them are more than a stone throw away with how much they are willing to expand on them. They only really nail home one, which is the deep-rooted effects of pollution, seeing how a majority of its story and side content are based around the destruction of pollutant-causing machinery. I really don't need politically charged hand-fisted messages thrown into my games like so many others seek, but I would like some of these themes to be brought to life by compelling conclusions through well-written plots or character arcs. Unfortunately, it just doesn't happen here. Frontiers of Pandora's story leaves a lot to the imagination. I mean, a lot. The twists are glaringly obvious, and a narrative about indoctrination and abuse against minors should have been way more emotionally engaging and thoughtful. Instead, everyone breaks free and is just kind of okay. Well, aside from Tayland, and I'm going to talk about him soon. Mercer as a villain is about as exciting as a tree falling in the woods when nobody is around. He's dull, boring, and as one-dimensional as almost every other character in the game. I'm guessing Ubisoft said, ain't no way we're gonna chill out a bunch of money for an A-list actor anymore just for them to be wasted. I mean, Mercer leaves Pandora for 16 years and he still comes back looking like the dude just lived in a Mark's warehouse the whole time he was away. Renala is the cautious warrior, Nor is the angsty teen that's too eager and angry, Mercer is the evil one, and so on. The only two characters worth mentioning here are Tayland and Dr. Alma. There are story spoilers coming up, so skip ahead to the timestamp on screen if you have yet to play the game. Tayland is a troubled Na'vi that struggles to live a life not under the rule of the RDA. He suffers from Stockholm Syndrome due to Mercer's insistent cruelty towards him. That isn't shown, by the way, it's just kind of told. What's the number one rule in cinema? Show, don't tell. Mercer's only successful asset out of the program that he started is Tayland, who will seek out the validation he thinks he needs from Mercer. It's pretty much a real-world illness that he suffers from the whole game, but they don't touch on how awful it is. They just use him as a twist when he eventually sells everybody you know out. He has people killed and then kind of says sorry, and everyone forgives him. That's the end of his arc. I saw it coming a mile away, and yet I was still disappointed by how right I was. It was so dumb. Dr. Alma, on the other hand, is literally a avatar like we saw from Jake Sully in the first film. She's a teacher hired by the RDA to educate and more or less corrupt them in the ways of humanity so that the RDA can use them in the future as ambassadors to prevent conflict, but in the worst case, to wage war against their own kind. And that sounds pretty twisted, right? Despite her actively trying to do her best for the kids with the restrictions she has to deal with, the Na'vi, for obvious reasons, don't trust her. She's constantly belittled and pushed aside due to her human form, and while she tries to fit in to their culture, she's just not really a part of it. Her arc was really well done. I like that she had to come to terms with the part that she played in the displacement and destruction caused to the kids, and Pandora itself. It gets her to challenge herself in ways that none of the other characters in the story do. She's probably the standout and my favorite. Now, the plot's main focus is having the player integrate with the Na'vi culture and become one of them by learning about their traditions while rallying distant clans to fight back with you against the RDA. Interwoven is a subplot about what happened to your clan that was thought to be wiped out by another, and what Mercer is really doing with his ambassador program. Some of the people you meet and the quests that you have to do are truly spectacular. I don't think another Ubisoft game will be able to top climbing a floating rock formation and then diving off of it to call your aerial mountain. It's an artistic rush backed by an amazing presentation and a showcase of the new movement system. There are some areas where the attention to detail is impeccable when it comes to the advancement of the game. Your character learns the ways of the Na'vi naturally by interacting with them and doing quests. You learn more about their interconnected culture the Na'vi share with the living ecosystem that is Pandora. For instance, when you're hunting in the opening hours, you'll track, shoot, and collect the ingredients as you normally would in any other game. However, it's not till a few hours into the game that a hunter teaches you the ways of hunting and how to respect the necessary sacrifices hunting entails, that then sees your character saying thanks to each animal you kill.
Thank you for these gifts.
He or she will make remarks about whether or not it was a clean kill too. This does wonders for world building and makes the world feel alive, tangible, and feel like you're a part of it. But we return to the unfortunate thing that I said before. The writing is missing any real complexity, so how the story is told is incredibly generic. The persistent build-up to the rising action and last showdown with Mercer is discouraging and boring. There's no climactic boss fight, he just kind of throws the same troops you've been obliterating for the past 35 hours at you like it's a major challenge. I'll admit, the number of enemies it throws at you makes it feel like you're actually a part of a war. It's chaotic and explosive in almost all the right ways, which is a lot more than I can say about how the villain meets his end or how the narrative concludes. I can see a lot of people not caring about how rubbish the story is, or I've seen it justified by people attempting to use the first movie's plot as an example, saying that, well, the first movie was about the world and not the story because the first movie didn't have a good story or a good arc. Like, yeah, Jake Sully does follow the typical hero's journey, but he is a multifaceted character that has hurdles to overcome. He's a Marine that learns to live life again through his avatar and become a natural born leader. He struggles with his guilt of playing both sides, one of which he thinks he owes a debt to because they share a race. It's also just about doing the right thing, being able to stand up to the people that will steamroll over you otherwise. All that Frontier's story did at the end of the day was make me realize that I had more free time to roam the world. Exploring worlds created by Ubisoft is a treat, and it's a staple of their titles, and Pandora doesn't break that mold. Actually, it might expand it a little bit. Their games have always looked incredibly well, with staggering high textured details, excellent volumetric lighting, dense foliage systems, and top quality sound design. This title was clearly a great time for massive entertainment to be artistic and creative while designing a world that not only looks otherworldly, but has this sense of gigantism despite your character's larger stature. The bright fauna and flora are perfectly contrasted by the ominous stone arches and structures that stand imposingly in the distance. It's not all for looks either, the world is interactive in ways that both hinder and aid the player in their journey. Plants will explode if you get too close and attack you like you just made a yo mama joke that they didn't like. Fungal jump pads give you verticality, and giant leaves will break your fall from staggering heights, ensuring movement doesn't go uninterrupted. The plethora of biomes that make up the map don't differ substantially, but like you won't be going from lush jungles to snow-capped mountains. It does share enough diversity in its terrain though to make later areas unique enough to incentivize exploration regardless of how much time you spent meandering around the previous one. I was kind of worried in the opening hours because the first area takes place in this low swamplands with many rivers, forests, and plant life that can be a bit visually overwhelming, but then I progressed into the upper plains and I was staggered in place by how alternative it felt and how it looked. The last area is one of many mountains, offering a more narrow experience. Visual assortment for any game is a must, and it's predominantly of importance when you're asking players to spend a minimum of 35 to 40 hours in your game. A game, mind you, that people could easily spend 100 hours plus in if they really wanted to or needed to. These areas go beyond just a new look though. They each have their own indigenous populations and vegetation, cementing the need for exploration if you wish to explore the crafting side of the game. Honestly, these locations are all just insanely fun to run, fly, and walk through, not to mention gawk at. I can't even count on two hands how many screenshots I took in this game, and that's not even something I regularly do. There are numerous species to hunt, items to collect, gear to craft, and outposts to dismantle. The creatures harken back to the days of old when they would be everywhere and have the capacity to seriously mess your day up if you weren't careful. Oh, what is that thing? Hammerhead rhinoceros?
A few moments later.
Jesus!
I'll get to them first, I promise.
Oh, not another one. Oh god. Remember the days of the honey badger? Yeah, fuck those guys. They are really savage, and losing them in the forest can be a challenge as you play games of cat and mouse. They are especially intense once you learn that they can and will climb after you. You gotta be joking! Hunting animals and leaving trails of blood will also bring about the presence of predatory animals in that certain area for a brief time. The upper plains offers temporary mounts as well to help you get across the game world because it's absolutely massive, though realistically you'll never need to use these horse-like guys because you have a flying mount that you can call in at almost any point in the game. If I had to tell you the number one reason to play Avatar, I'd have to say it's its world. It's a technical achievement, and the amount of detail on display helped build a world that feels alien and connected. There's this untamed primitive beauty that puts our industrialized world to shame. But if I had to go ahead, come in here and give you a second reason to play, which I don't really have to, but I will because I'm such a nice guy, it would be the gameplay. Far Cry games have always had this satisfying flow to the gameplay. The moments of exploration were evenly dispersed between moments of madness and violence. Disclaimer here, but Far Cry 6 is not included in this example because that game sucked more than a clogged toilet. Back to regular programming, Avatar takes the basics of those previous games and improves upon it with its new free-form movement, up-tempo combat, and the ability to yeet infantry soldiers by kicking them with your bare foot like the NFL star that you were born to be. From leaping across the battlefield, scaling a mountain, all the way to flying your Ecron above the clouds.
All of this just works.
It feels fluid, responsive, and when the fantastic music kicks in, it just honestly, it completes the whole experience. Sliding into an encampment while springing that elastic energy pent up in your bow as its counterpart invades the unlucky recipient's organs became an addiction to my 4th grade level brain. Upgrading your character adds upon the power fantasy by stacking skills, and I can promise you that once you unlock the ability to rib a pilot from their bipedal mechs, you're not going to want to go back. You're not going to want to stop. There's enough variety in its weapons that each serve a purpose. The bow is great for stealth and long-range attacks, the sling will give you an advantage to lay traps, the spear launcher deals heavy damage to equipment, and absolutely demolishes infantry, ensuring that they won't receive an open casket funeral. The heavy bow is the go-to for hunting, and the rapid fire bow I use to take out multiple guys in rapid succession. You only get 2 RDA guns, an automatic rifle, and a shotgun. The shotgun's pretty useful in almost all encounters if they're up close, but I found the rifle to be the weakest of the arsenal and I just ended up not using it that much. They all have their moments to shine depending on the scenario. If you have mechs advancing on your position, you'll most likely favor the sling and the shotgun, laying traps and sprinting out to obliterate them up close. It's a slight departure from their other games because typically any gun can work in any scenario. The combat is inherently an integral part of the experience, but so too is traversal. Simply exploring the world and making use of the plant life helps you build up a momentum, making quick work of the great distance that lays before you. In fact, the movement felt so good that I often even forwent travel by mount. Hunting and resource gathering aren't achieved by a single button prompt or careless shooting anymore. Thought and caution has to be put even to just picking a fruit off a plant. That's because there are qualities and rarities to every ingredient, and if you want to get the best materials, you need to pick it the right way in the right conditions. Similarly, if you're hunting, you need to follow scent trails, stalk them, and line up your shot to get a clean kill by hitting a weak spot. I really liked this methodical approach to the way players have to engage with these systems. Plus, there's a lot of customization options for both your character and the Ecron that you can literally name, by the way. Okay, do any of these names mean anything? Carol? Why would I want the Ecron to be named Carol? That can be crafted by partaking in these activities. I can see people being put off by how meticulous it can be. I'm not even gonna disagree, but it's inspirations from Red Dead 2 are clear, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't make Pandora feel a lot more tangible. It can feel a bit conflicting with the game's quicker nature at times. You do feel like the world is living around you though, instead of using it to bend to your will, and that is what Ubisoft typically does flawlessly. For all the game's upsides though, you better believe it has its fair share of downsides. Avatar is certainly not immune to criticism or issues, and at this point, this far into their career as a business, these issues really shouldn't be issues. I'm talking about performance, bugs, poorly done AI, dumbed down outposts, and a gear-based power system that is often too restrictive. I'll regret saying this due to how the gaming community views this console, but I played Frontiers of Pandora on an Xbox Series S. I know it's a budget console and I shouldn't expect a true next-gen experience from a console that is nowhere near as powerful as its beefier rivals. I don't expect them to run as good, and I'm fine with that. But with that said, I do expect them to run well within the parameters of a 30 FPS 1440p console, and well, it doesn't. The rate at which the frame rate drops in this game is absurd. Some areas of the map just tank the frame rate, so I just don't even go to them anymore. It could be the Snowdrop engine or how much visual information they have on screen at one time, but I've never had this many bad frame drops in any Ubisoft game I've ever played, and they're horrible. I also had a couple of bugs that required me to restart the game to continue a quest. The Navi Sense is your typical X-ray mode. It'll help you see through walls, detect enemies, find plants, quest markers, but you also need to use this to find items in the environment during sections that task you with piecing clues together, and it's kind of hard to do that when your Navi Sense refuses to work. Really, it's not that big of an issue, but I did have to restart the game to get it to work again, and because of SSDs and a great checkpoint system, it really wasn't long before I was back in the game. Not a big issue, but it happened quite a few times. And it's not a big issue, but bugs should be mentioned regardless of their severity. Luckily, I didn't have any quests that were bugged, but I have seen quite a few people online complaining about quests that they can't finish, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, moving off of performance is actually where I have most of my issues with this game. During the early stages of the game, I noticed that my attackers were able to strike me from locations that they shouldn't have been able to. Hiding behind cover? Check. Deep in the forest where I can't even see them? Check. Even when jumping around fighting them like you're supposed to be doing, I found that their hit success rate was staggeringly high despite using the dodge mechanic in excess. Making retreats from fights was hard because they would mow me down. I get that they're supposed to be more advanced, but heat-seeking rounds almost, it's not a good way to provide a challenge. Outposts are kind of shallow with their layouts and forces that inhabit them. For comparison's sake, the Far Cry games had reasons to be strategic. A variety of troops filled the outposts, giving you a list of who and what to eliminate first to have a successful run. And you could hide bodies. Alarms could be tampered with or destroyed altogether, giving you a fallback option if things got out of hand. Well, none of that really holds true in Avatar. Outposts always seem to have the same foes, the same normal infantry, and a couple snipers and some amp suits with varying weapons. There are no alarms to disable for an advantage because everyone in the compound is an alarm. So getting detected often leads to a guy across the map calling in reinforcements, and making it to him in that short period of time leads to you getting lit up. Honestly, it wouldn't be that big of an issue if you weren't punished for engaging in the combat in these areas. Doing so often takes away valuable gear from the command rooms, which seems odd because Avatar definitely leans way more into an action approach than it does stealth. Every single one of these outposts also has a minimum of 3 interfaces that you have to interact with to bring the whole thing crumbling down. They try to make them diverse and interesting by placing obstacles like gas and electricity, but all it really does is make them incredibly annoying. It's also just a huge missed opportunity that there isn't a mechanic that allows you to utilize the wildlife to do your work for you. Realistically, I could walk into the woods in Far Cry 4, provoke a honey badger into following me into an outpost to do my bidding for me. Sometimes you would just show up to an outpost and an elephant would be flinging people over the walls. You never knew how an outpost was going to play out. All of the major compounds in this game are walled off, so you just never get that. Thanators are perhaps one of the most wicked animals in the Avatar universe, and you can't ride them here or unleash them into outposts. Why? That's dumb. This next issue I had is pretty subjective. Some people love it and some people hate it in their games, and that's weapons and gear being tied to a power level. I personally find it restricts me from being able to swap weapons on the fly, because doing so can take up to a level away from you, even under ranking you for the mission that you're on. I'll set up a gameplay scenario for you. I'm alone in the woods. I have to defend this relay that amounts to 3 waves of enemies being thrown at me, and the troops that are being thrown at me are being brought in by aircraft. I know that I have a bow with an explosive tipped arrow in my inventory, so I go to grab it, thinking that I can down the aircraft before they even have a chance to land. But wait, switching to it takes away an entire level, making me weaker for the mission because I'm lower than what the level of the mission recommends. That stuff just drives me nuts. I just don't see a point in a single player game doing this. There's quite an expansive skill tree here, so I just don't know why they just couldn't have tied those to your power level. I find skill points hardly did anything in my power level. Like, they just kind of seemed redundant. The crafting is there for a reason, and I could have gone out of my way to make a bow that had the secondary fire I was looking for, but I just couldn't be bothered. There are some basic survival elements, and hunting and foraging will give you the ingredients to cook with that will give you timed bonuses like increased stealth damage. It's also just a necessity because not eating will deplete a meter that regenerates your stamina and health. I'll admit, I've never been one for extensive crafting in any game. I know it's a main feature here technically, but I just find it's too overwhelming. I spent hundreds of hours in The Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2, and even then, I only did crafting when I had to, even though I knew I was missing out on content. So how you feel about this is going to vary. It's a competent crafting system that does require you to do some research and learn about the ingredients you're looking for. I just don't care about it. Now, most open world games have content that is considered padding. It's just a result of having to fill the space with content that justifies the price point and gives players lists of activities to do. Notice that I didn't say fulfilling activities. One of these such activities is often puzzles, whether it's flipping switches, jumping from button to button, or hacking something. Avatar 2 features puzzles which take the form of a hacking maze-like minigame using a handheld device. I hated these. At first I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool, this is an okay puzzle, until I realized that you do this a minimum of 100 times in the 35 hours that I played. 100 times! It's not even an exaggeration! Who put this into the game? I want to know. I want to know who is responsible for this, and who is responsible for my depression because of this. Need to get through a door? Hack it. Need to unlock a chest? Hack it. Need to stop a mech? Hack it. Need to alter the flow of electricity to unlock fast travel points? You guessed it, hack it. But don't just hack it several times. Just no. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. So, moving on from that, it wouldn't be an open world game without a checklist of side missions you accumulate by just playing the game. And Avatar has a lot of them. All I can really say is don't expect much in the way of substance from any of them, because they never leave the realm of fetch quests or more reasons to do outposts you have yet to conquer. The writing just isn't enough to carry any of these side stories. I could care less about helping this guy find his wife as they struggle to come to terms with the idea that starting a family on Pandora just isn't viable. I mean, that's a super interesting dilemma to dive into, but it's just a one-off quest. I know it's referenced a lot, but look, The Witcher 3 showed the world what true side content could offer, branching stories that held emotion, stakes, and believable personalities. You just aren't gonna find that here. For everything Frontiers of Pandora does right, there's something equally as bad. What Ubisoft excels at is highlighted here as some of their best work lately. I'm including the recent Assassin's Creed games, which I did love. The depth of the world is incredible, and how it aids the player in all of these aspects of the game really ties it together as a tangible place which can't be understated. The combat is fluid and fast-paced, jumping around, blowing stuff up, and yeeting enemies out of their precious assets makes you feel like a Na'vi defending their home. It's authentic to the films, and that's exactly what people were looking for in a game named Avatar. Some of the areas where it falters does damage the experience though, so much so that I can't see myself returning to it unless my friends want to play co-op or I have some kind of itch to go look at the scenery again. Oil rigs and outposts are repetitive and lack the nuance that I think previous Far Cry games did better. Once you've done about 5 of them, you've pretty much seen every layout. When it comes down to it, there really just isn't enough risk-taking here, and at this point, Ubisoft needs to start venturing off their trample path to tread new ground. Was my time played filled with fun? Mostly, yeah, but it was also filled with frustrating shit as I struggled with the game's pacing, the side activities, and the plethora of other issues I took away from it. I should mention that this review is not even on the basis of a full purchase. I paid for Ubisoft Plus for a month, and I'm glad I did, because this is the perfect Ubisoft Plus game. I would have regretted dropping 100 plus Canadian. No shade to Massive, but that's just the way it is. That's the honest truth. So that's my in-depth review of Avatar. I like to do these super in-depth reviews because I know many video reviewers can't really cover all of these intricacies in order to get a review out on time for the game's launch. So that's kind of what I'm here for. If you like the video, like, sub, comment. Thanks for watching. Good night and good lunch.